Welcome back to Vintage Camera Digest. Today we're going back to 1983 to look at the camera that took Olympus to the next level, the OM-4. So stay tuned. "1983. What a year. The year I turned 16. Got my first car, an orange 1969 Chevrolet Camaro. The year the Police released the Synchronicity album, and the year I got to finally see them in concert. The year of my first job, which I'm sure most of the money I made went into putting a new stereo system in the orange Camaro so that I, and everyone else in town, could listen to Synchronicity at a high volume. And it was quite fitting that the guitarist for the Police, Andy Summers, is quite an accomplished photographer. Now, I don't know if he used an OM-4, but he could have. Well, I don't want to get too caught up in my halcyon days of 1983 when we're really here to discuss this beauty and how it got here. When Olympus brought out their OM-1 back in 1972, they had a hit on their hands. That camera was smaller than its rivals, the lenses for the system were quite compact and excellent, and the camera featured a clutter-free viewfinder that was unsurpassed in size and brightness. And the camera's small size shook up the entire camera industry. After its release, other manufacturers were sent scrambling to design smaller bodies that would be able to compete. So you can certainly thank Olympus for the Pentax MX and the Minolta XD, to name a few. And in 1975, Olympus did it again, this time with the electronically controlled OM-2. It had all the best features of the OM-1 and added aperture priority automatic exposure. In 1979, these two cameras were upgraded slightly to the OM-1N and OM-2N. But the next real evolutionary step for Olympus would be in 1983 with the release of their electronically controlled flagship, the OM-4. The OM-4 wasn't just a reworking of an OM-2. It was built on a brand new chassis and finally added exposure information in the viewfinder. If you've seen my episode on the OM-1, you'll recall I gave the camera some grief over not having any exposure info in the finder other than a simple needle for the meter. Well, that was remedied with the OM-4, and Olympus invented a word for it. They called it Lumitronics, and it displayed all the available shutter speeds across the bottom of the screen with a moving LCD block to indicate correct exposure. And while that was a welcome addition, that wasn't the best thing this new camera had to offer. This was the first camera to offer multi-spot metering. Now I know some of you are sitting there going, oh, here we go with the multi-spot metering thing again. Yes, I know I make a big deal out of that, and it seems like recently I've brought it up in each of the last few episodes. But it indeed is a big deal. If you've never had the opportunity to use a system that features that, I recommend you do because you'll be amazed at the accuracy of your exposures. And yes, the OM-4 started it all. Multi-spot metering allows you to make up to 8 individual 3-degree spot readings, then the camera computes an exposure based on all of those readings. This type of metering is actually quite rare. The number of camera models ever produced that use this method can be counted on 2 hands, probably 1.5. So if you were to ask, if it's such a great metering method, Stephen, why was it never offered on more cameras? Well, I completely understand, but here's the deal. The OM-4 came out in 1983. Another camera that came out that same year was the Nikon FA. And the FA was really Nikon's most technologically advanced camera. And it had some amazing specifications. And one of those specs was a new system of metering called multi-pattern. The way it worked was that it divided the screen up into 5 sections, took individual readings from each of those sections, compared those with an internal data bank of 100,000 or so scenarios to suggest an optimal exposure. But you see what happened there? It divided the screen into sections and took readings from each one. Sort of like what you can do with a multi-spot system. The main difference here being that those areas are predefined in a multi-pattern metering system. With multi-spot, the photographer actually chooses the areas to measure and is able to give more computational weight to any of those areas they choose simply by metering it more than once. The values are computed in real time as opposed to the system in the Nikon, which needed to access predefined data. It was an interesting new system for sure, and if they could get multi-pattern to compute exposure in real time, it might be the way to go. And it was. 1987 saw the release of Canon's EOS 650, the first in that brand new autofocus system, and it had, as standard metering, a 6-zone evaluative pattern that computed exposure in real time. And as we say in the US, that was all she wrote, because it was a better system than the center-weighted averaging that had been the norm for almost 2 decades, and it required no special input from the user. It was easy. Multi-spot metering requires the user to make decisions about what to measure, and your average user probably didn't want that kind of pressure. If multi-spot had been offered on more cameras, it probably would have proven to be a feature that most shooters didn't use. But on a pro-oriented camera, that's where it would definitely see some use. And that brings us full circle back to this photographic wonder. Besides the multi-spot metering, the camera features center-weighted averaging as well as single-spot metering, as well as a highlight and shadow control feature. So, let's dive in. If you're unfamiliar with any of the OM series cameras, the first thing you might ask is, where is the shutter speed control? Because you're not going to find it on the top like most other cameras. With the Olympus OM cameras, the shutter speed control is around the lens mount, and you can select which you want by grabbing and turning the little knurled handles. The shutter speed range of the OM-4 is 1 second to 1/2000th of a second, plus B, and a 1/60th of a second mechanically controlled shutter speed, which is awesome because you can use it when the batteries die, and a little bit of foreshadowing here, you most likely will get to use that feature at some point. But to use the mechanical speed, or B, you just need to press this tiny button on the bottom left of the lens mount. It's labeled as B lock, and then you can rotate the shutter control past 1 second to get to the mechanical speeds. Over on the top right, we have a lot going on. Besides the wind lever, the film counter, and the shutter release, we have the film rewind button, which is usually found on the bottom plate of SLRs, and we have the spot meter button, as well as the highlight and shadow button, which we'll get to in just a bit. And surrounding the shutter release is the exposure memory switch. We'll also come back to that in just a bit. Over on the left top is your rewind crank, your film speed dial, and exposure compensation setting. That's also where you'll find the switch that lets you choose between auto and manual mode. The battery check feature is also incorporated into this switch. On the prism, we have the hot shoe and a built-in diopter adjustment. That was unusual on cameras of the time. Adjusting for your vision usually required you to purchase additional viewfinder lenses, so having this included on the OM-4 is really quite cool. On the front of the camera, below the nameplate, is a self-timer switch that also doubles as a way to turn off the various beeps you hear when operating the camera. Just above that, on the side of the lens mount, is the viewfinder illumination button. And over on the other side of the lens mount, near the B-lock button, is the PC socket. And above that, just below the film speed control dial, is the TTL auto cord socket for using a TTL flash off camera. Looking in the viewfinder, the supplied focusing screen is of the split image micro prism collar type. But in total, there are 14 screens that you could choose from. And the OM-4 has 2 exposure modes available, metered manual and aperture priority automatic. As for the metering, when the OM-4 was released, Modern Photography magazine had this to say about it. No SLR is or has ever been capable of such precise exposure calculations as the OM-4. So let's do a deep dive. The default metering mode is a center-weighted TTL like most other cameras of the day. In automatic mode, you'll see the entire range of shutter speeds across the bottom of the viewfinder, as well as a line of LCD blocks or bar graph. The shutter speed under which that bar ends is going to indicate the camera's chosen shutter speed. And since the camera is aperture preferred, if you don't like that chosen shutter speed, you can just change the f-stop. Aperture values, however, are not indicated in the viewfinder. If the shutter speed aperture combination is going to result in overexposure, you'll get a warning for that in the viewfinder as well. There's also no special shutter speed setting you need to make on the shutter dial when using aperture priority. As long as it's not set to B, or the mechanical 1/60th of a second, the camera completely ignores the shutter dial in automatic mode. Now, the real selling point of the camera, of course, is the spot metering options. To use this method, align the micro prism collar over the area you want to measure, and press the spot button right next to the shutter release. Again, the end of the bar graph will indicate the camera's chosen shutter speed, and in addition, you'll see a small diamond LCD appear over the bar graph. This indicates the spot metering exposure. You'll also see the word spot listed over on the right side of the information bar. To take advantage of the multi-spot feature, You can measure up to 8 different spots. Just align the spot metering area over a different area in the scene and press the spot button again. Another diamond LCD will appear over the bar graph and shutter scale to indicate the spot reading exposure. And as you add additional spot readings, more LCD diamonds will populate the scale. And the end of the bar graph will appear over the computed shutter speed. If you need a different speed, just change the aperture and the overall exposure will shift accordingly. If you need to reset the multi-spot feature during the process, just slide the memory switch clockwise to clear the readings and start over. Otherwise, the computed exposure will remain until the shutter is released, after which it exits spot mode and resets. If you want to save the computed exposure, just slide the memory switch counterclockwise toward the prism before you release the shutter, and it will hold that exposure. To clear the memory, slide the switch clockwise. If you don't manually clear the reading, it'll stay in memory until 60 minutes from the shutter being released. The memory will also be cleared if the mode switch is moved from auto to manual or vice versa, or the lens is removed and replaced. Another way to use the spot meter is in the highlight and shadow control. To use the highlight control, use the spot meter to measure an area of highlight, then press the highlight button to the left of the spot button. You'll see the word highlight appear in the viewfinder under spot, and this will correct the exposure to give you 2 stops over exposure to ensure that the highlight area that you measured will stay bright. Pressing the shutter release will clear the highlight control, or you can cancel the highlight control before pressing the shutter by pressing the highlight button once again. To use the shadow control, just measure an area of shadow with the spot meter, then press the shadow button to the left of the spot button. You'll see the word shadow appear in the viewfinder, and this will correct the exposure to give 2 2/3 stop of underexposure to ensure that that area that you measured will stay dark. And like before, pressing the shutter will clear that shadow control, or you can press the shadow button again to cancel it. In metered manual mode, the information in the viewfinder changes. Now, instead of the entire range of shutter speeds, you'll only see the one that's currently selected. Above that is the manual metering scale. When the end of the bar graph lines up with that fixed point between the 2 arrows, it indicates a correct exposure. And you can adjust either the shutter speed, aperture, or both to get that bar to line up with that fixed point. You can also use the multi-spot metering in manual mode. Just spot each area that you want to measure, then either adjust the f-stop or the shutter speed so that the end of the bar graph lines up with the fixed point. For this exposure, I just changed from 1/60th of a second to 1/30th of a second to align the meter. The next camera to even compete with this system was the Canon T90. And I love the T90, but with that camera, you can only use the multi-spot metering in shutter priority mode. The OM-4 lets you use it in aperture priority or metered manual. Now, as much as I'd like to say the OM-4 is the perfect camera, I have to call it out in just one area, and that is battery performance. There is no off switch, and this was on purpose. The designers wanted to provide the user a camera that was ready to use as soon as you pick it up. But I really have to wonder how many shots are actually missed by taking a second to turn a camera on. In any case, that design led to the OM-4 being notorious for severe battery drain. In the early copies of the camera, it was particularly bad. I've heard that a slightly updated circuit was designed and the early OM-4s could be sent back to Olympus under warranty to swap it out. So it was a real problem they had to deal with. And at some point in manufacturing, the original circuit was upgraded to the less battery-hungry type. The problem we have now is that it's really tough to tell if an OM-4 has the updated circuit, at least before you buy it. If you spring for the upgraded OM-4T or TI, you're guaranteed the new circuit. But what if you just have a plain OM-4 like this? Well, you can test it like this. Turn the main switch to the battery check position. You'll hear the beeping and the red light on the front will come on. If it shuts off after 30 seconds, congratulations, you have an updated copy. I tested mine this way, and guess what? Yep, it's the old circuit. I put fresh batteries in it when I got it a couple of weeks ago, played around with it a bit to get comfortable with using it, and 1 week later, in the middle of a roll of film, the batteries died. So that's when that mechanical shutter speed of 1/60th of a second might come in handy. Still, even if you have a battery eater version of this camera, there's a couple of things you can do. Always use silver oxide batteries. Stay away from alkaline or lithium. The silver oxide is going to last you longer. And remove the batteries when you're not using the camera. There's also been suggestions over the years to set the shutter speed to B or the mechanical 1/60th of a second to reduce the battery drain. I think the general consensus, though, is that it might help a little, but it won't fix the problem. So I'll continue to use the previous two methods. Maybe taking the batteries out is a bit of a pain, but I do that with cameras all the time since I swap them about so often, and I'm not going to let that get in the way of using this. Now, let's go shoot some film. Today I'm down in Whitesburg, Georgia at the McIntosh Reserve, a park. Got a little bit of history to this place. This was the home area of the Creek Indians of Carroll County, Georgia, way back when. And this park is dedicated to that heritage. We have a reconstruction of this old building here, so I thought it would be a good opportunity to use the OM-4 and a couple of rolls of HP5 to see what we can get out of this. It is in the middle of the day, so lighting is very contrasty, but that's gonna be fine. Well, it'll be fine for us because we're going to use the OM-4 and use that multi-spot metering and the shadow metering and the highlight metering as we see fit. So for the first couple of shots, I'm going to use this side of the building. We've got a porch that's got a roof over it, which is causing some deep shadows through the porch. We've got some sun on the chimney here, which has got good texture. That's great. But we've got these cool clouds in the back and we've got a nice blue sky. So I'm gonna shoot this without any filters to begin with, just to see what we get. And then I'm gonna put a red filter on it. Maybe we can make the sky a little bit darker and the clouds a little bit more impressive. But I'm gonna use the multi-spot metering. Right now I've got a 28mm lens on. It is not an Olympus lens, it is a Tokina lens. But still. All right, got it in auto mode, we got film in. All right, let's make some pictures. All right, let's put spot meter on. All right, so it's giving me f11 at 1/500th of a second, and that makes sense because I've got 400 speed film in here because I figured I might be using some filters here. Now, if I had wanted to keep that exposure and not have to do all that metering again, I should have used the memory switch to use to turn that on, and I didn't. Maybe I'll remember to do that. Again, with no filters. All right, go back into spot mode. I get a little beep every time. All right, so I'm going to set that into memory, and that will stay in memory for up to an hour or until I move the switch from manual, or when I move the switch from auto to manual. All right, now I've got the red filter on there. Let's do some shots just exactly the same way. All right, so I'm gonna open the f-stop up to about 5.6 for this because let me clear that memory. All right, that's good. Now let's make some new measurements. All right, so it's saying 1/250th of a second at 5.6. And I did not hit the memory switch there, so we're gonna do that again. All right, now I've got the memory. 1/250th of a second at 5.6. Let's get a slightly different angle. Again, using the same exposure. I do wish I had more light on this corner of the house, of the building, but because it really is dark compared to the sky.
but I do have more points on it metered than I do have the sky. I did pull a spot from the blue sky and I pulled a spot from the clouds in the back, but I pulled multiple spots from the darker area on the house. So theoretically, adding more of those in than the brighter areas should bias the exposure toward a little more. That's the theory anyway. Let's do some with a polarizing filter, same thing. All right, so I got the polarizer on the lens. Let's see, I mean, that's gonna make the sky a little bit darker blue. I don't know that it's gonna affect much else on this shot. Well, it's not gonna make the sky a darker blue, not in black and white, it's just gonna make it a darker gray. But it'll be interesting to compare the results for this with the red filter. Let me clear my memory. Yes, it does affect blueness or the deepness of the sky. Now we're getting some really interesting clouds there in the back. So I'm going to compare the exposure just in center weighted auto with what I would get with that multi-spot metering, just to give you an idea of the difference. And maybe I'll do one with just the regular auto exposure, and then we'll do the next one with the multi-spot, just to show you the difference, because I think it's a huge difference in exposure. That's my prediction. So we have cleared any memory, and we're just going to use the polarizing filter, the polarizer again. All right, so let's do F8. So at F8, it's showing me 1/500th of a second at F8. And that is reading now at almost at 1/250th of a second at F8. So that's giving us almost a stop and a half more exposure. All right, for the next few shots, I really like this window here with the texture of the chimney, the rock that makes that up. So I'm changed to the 50mm lens, and I think I want to try to get a couple of verticals out of this that will frame up the window and that chimney and the rocks that are in the foundation. So let's check it out. So I'm going to go with, I'm going to do F8. We just lost a little bit of light, which is actually pretty good. All right, so let's do one as just on the regular. And now let's do a few spot readings here. All right. Oop. Sun came back out. Let's remeter that. All right, so now it's telling me 1/250th of a second at F8. And we've just lost the light again. Wow. Gotta work quick on this. So I can see how some people would say, no, I don't want to take the time for all of that. Multi-spot stuff takes too long. But here we go. So yeah, waiting just a few minutes. We've got this nice big cloud coming over, so it's going to give us some shade for a little bit. And I think that'll be great for this because it's really contrasty lighting, and now it's not so bad. All right, so we are going to reshoot this last thing here. Got F8, and the meter's telling me 1/125th of a second. Let's do a vertical there too. All right. In the next few shots, I'm going to use the multi-spot metering. I like this shot a lot. Gonna go back, gonna frame it up vertically like we did just then. Not nearly as contrasty as it was just a moment ago. And it's asking for just a slight bit more exposure. And I did not hit the memory switch. Man, that's something you gotta get used to. All right. right, memory is activated. So we're at almost at 1/125th of a second. Some horizontals out of this. So I'm not remetering this, I've got it saved in memory, which does save a lot of time. Go back to vertical here. So I think I've got a shot straight down this porch with the steps in the background there, but we're gonna go with some shallow depth of field. So I'm gonna go f2.8. All right, and this is just your standard auto exposure. All right, so let's spot it. That was 1/500th of a second at f2.8. And it is 1/1000th of a second, almost between 1/2000 and 1/1000 without using the multi-spot. And that's because I'm metering inside this dark area there. Because part of that actually is showing up in the shot, and I don't want it to go totally black. Now we're about to get our sun back for sure, and that's gonna bring back some contrast. Did not hit memory, because that is something I really need to learn to do. Memory, okay. Move a little bit closer. Gonna rewind this film, put a new roll in, and we'll get cracking on that next one. So I thought I was at least gonna make it through an episode finally where I didn't have audio issues. Well, and the audio issues, they're not problems. They're just my head can't remember to turn everything back on when I move places to turn everything back on. So that last little set you got to see, but you didn't hear any audio. I don't think I said anything that profound. But we're really close to the Chattahoochee River, and I know there will be highlight spots on the river. So I think after we shoot a couple more here, we'll go down there. So I want to shoot straight down the porch here. We've got some really contrasty light right here, and then we've got the shaded light under the porch. So let's test that spot meter with this. I'm just going to shoot this sort of at an angle, just like you see it right here. So I've got the 28 back on here. I want to put this post almost on this third. If we're going by the rule of thirds, I want to put this post over on this side. All right, so let's measure this up. All right, there's measuring some areas under the porch. Let's measure that bright area there and there. Measure the roof of the porch, and we've got a lot of contrast here. So I have f8 at 1/125th of a second. Let's go f11. That's going to put me at 1/60th of a second. That's going to give me a little bit more depth of field for this shot. Ooh, let's meter. All right, let's save that memory. Good. Way to go. Way to remember that broom. A couple more shots here with this. We're at 1/60th of a second at f11. So before we move on completely from this location, I figured I would come inside and try to shoot in one of the corners of this room. So we've got window light coming in, a lot of texture in here. We've got the fireplace. I don't know if I don't know if that multi-spot metering can accommodate all of this, but we'll see. I am gonna have to take this camera off the tripod because I need it for the other camera. Let's clear that memory. All right, so we're gonna go with a highlight first. So there's the window. Inside, door. Need to get this fireplace in there. All right, and I'm shooting it, I'm gonna go f8, and it's telling me 1/4 of a second at f8. All right, let's put this on the tripod and frame it up. Yep, still in memory. All right. So before I remove this camera from the tripod altogether, I'm going to get a nice upward angle of the steps that are leading up into the second floor. I had it metered and it was telling me 1/4 of a second at f11. And I'm going to use manual mode on this. So we're going to shoot a few from here. We've got this stump out in the water. There is a limb of leaves hanging down right below that. And then we've got all this highlight from the river back there in the back. All right, let's see what we've got. I'm going to meter this up with the multi-spot after I get it arranged how I want. All right, so let's do at f8. And let's put this into memory. So it's 1/250th of a second at f8. Let's do f11. I need some depth of field here. Let's see, what sort of vertical might I have here? Okay, I like that. But I am going to meter this again because I'm getting a little bit more shadow area. All right, so f11 at 1/125th of a second. Let's go f5.6. Change up the depth of field just a little bit. I like this lens, 75 to 150. It's got a good reach on it. Before I move on from this location, I'm going to get another couple of verticals all the way to at the 150 end of the focal range of this lens. F11 with 1/125th of a second. Shift focus just a little bit. I really haven't found a situation where I needed to use the highlight or shadow control, so I'm going to keep looking for that. But now that we've lost a lot of that directional sun, we've got a nice little creek through here, and we've got this path that runs back through there, and I want to shoot deep. I don't know. It may be cool. It may suck. I don't know. Let's try it out and see. So obviously I'm going to use the spot system here. So let's shoot this one way without any sort of spot metering. And that was f5.6 at 1/125th of a second. Let's go f8, and maybe they'll give us 1/60th of a second. And then we'll use the spot meter to do the same thing. I think we're about to have the light come out again. I'm gonna go ahead and meter it up just in case. All right, so I got a highlight, I got shadows there. All right, so that's saying 1/30th of a second at f8. So let's go f5.6 so we can get 1/60th of a second. Got the 50mm back on, so I'm gonna go for some super shallow depth of field. I wanna get some of these river pebbles here with the reflections of the trees there in the back in the water. And we get this nice ripple effect. So here's one without spot metering. That was at 1.4. Let's go to F2. It's telling me 1/125th of a second at F2. All right, so let's spot meter this and see what I've got. 1/125th of a second at F2. And that's the roll.
Well, that wasn't bad, but I could do better. The shots of the cabin were a bit underexposed. It was a very contrasty scene, and even though I metered multiple spots on the cabin, I think the sky was so bright that it biased the exposure. I think I could go back at a different time of day where the sun is more direct on that side of the building, and the shot will be better. And using filters on that shot just made it worse. I know we could have bracketed the exposures, but I really just wanted to see how it worked by trusting the camera completely. The rest of the shot's pretty good exposures, I think, and the negatives look really good. If you'd like to check out higher resolution versions of these shots, I'll put a link down in the description. I've been doing that for the last several episodes, but I keep forgetting to mention it. But you can go back and check those. I think I started it with the Pentax 6x7 shoot. In general, I do like the OM-4. It's small and compact, the lenses are small and compact, and it's almost like carrying nothing around. And the metering system is incredible. One thing I absolutely need to train myself to do, though, is to set the exposure to memory when taking multiple shots of the same subject. That will save a lot of time and keep you from having to re-meter all of those spots again. And I'm sorry I didn't get the opportunity to check out the highlight and shadow control. I didn't think that any of the subjects of the shoot would have benefited from it, but in retrospect, though, I probably could have used it on the shots of the cabin, at least the shadow control. So if any of you are OM users, I'd love to hear from you. What sort of tips and tricks of the camera would you tell a newbie like myself? Well, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If so, please leave a like. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel already, I encourage you to do so. We're all about film photography here, and there seems to be no shortage of ideas to cover. But if you have a suggestion for a future video, feel free to let me know in the comments. I always look forward to hearing what y'all have to say. Coming up soon will be a tutorial in black and white film processing that I'll probably break into several parts. But in the next episode, we'll be looking at what just might be the ultimate camera for macro photography. The Yashica Dental Eye. That'll be fun, so you don't want to miss it. So until next time, put some film in your camera and create something beautiful. And I'll see you then.